Tails tells Sonic he's okay. It also has a joke because he says at first he implies that he's strange. A movement at the end of the maze at the point where the silver pathways meet the red sky gets his attention, and he sees a huge buzz bomber heading for him, not sticking to the pathways. He gets called a rogue program and puts his arms up. He's told he has no business in the video card, but then he's told to return to his designated task area or he'll be held in a memory cache. Why would he think he has a designated task area if he has no business here? What a simplistic-minded robot. Tails is smart enough to try to come up with a lie. He says he's a freelance systems analysis program who checks to see that the computer is running efficiently. It's already been established that the robot is stupid, so him saying and hesitating before the lie might not give it away either. It's only suspicious because he's not very efficient at carrying out his program. He considers taking Tails to the reprogramming unit, but somehow takes his word for it anyways, despite being human enough to chuckle and say you're on. He runs away, not in the direction the robot hornet anticipated, and instead under it. There's padding as nothing new happens for a huge paragraph's worth of time. His idea was that running in as straight a line as possible was somehow more likely to get him out of the maze and finding any way of cover or protection than taking a turn. He's got no reason to think there is cover and a way to protect himself here. He's just desperate. A buzz bomb crashes into the ground beside him, sending a spurt of melted metal into the air, and he dodges the droplets. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be firing fireballs, not actual bombs. But I'm glad that it does something new. Makes it look more competent. But he's still being chased by the buzz bomber. The pathway gets wider and he goes under an overhead signpost. He hears a shriek and crash. While still running, he looks back at the buzz bomber that flew into an invisible wall and ends up shrinking away. He runs into a large signpost saying he's entering expanded memory. It tells him to check his parody first. So there's a joke where he checks himself in confusion before walking ahead on the great floor with no trenches cutting in his sections. In its middle is a large rectangle set into the floor that buzzes with static. It turns to black with yellow letters, mistaken for the witch because he's carrying her black box. He's told to use a handset to transmit or receive data. You mean the witch didn't already know that? The screen on the floor clears and fills with a huge list of computer jargon that sadly means nothing to Tails. He sees a sign saying that he's entering the video card, and he can't communicate with Sonic, so he gets upset at first. He walks back onto the video card pathway and insists to look at the gray screen in the sky. He shouts in response and wonders if it's Sonic's fault by accident that he couldn't see the monitor screen. And somehow he gives Sonic the credit for getting rid of the buzz bomber. Tails figures out that it couldn't keep going after him because it's part of the video part of the computer. And when he ran under the sign, he left the video card, which is why he couldn't see the screen anymore. Somehow, Sonic can't understand what he's saying. Sure, there was no proof that he wasn't like this in the games in 1993, but he's also supposed to be cool, so he shouldn't look dumber than the average person. I don't like that the narration says, unbelievably, something occurred to him. Tails runs back towards the other screen in the middle of the open space with a long list. He looks at it looking for something he vaguely remembered and pulls out the black box. Uses the identify button and gets given exposition about the output device, complete with a visual from the screen. He's told that it was made to create real versions of images. Wouldn't this be something that the AI in here are expected to already know? The writer knew this and proves it because a video of Eggman shows up on the screen asking which of his programmed creations was trying to access his restricted data. He laughs at Tails, and I get to read about Tails name-calling him. He refuses to tell him whether he's captured Sonic as well out of spite, and tells him they're gonna find their friends. He also lampshades his egg obsession finally. I wish he ate a lot of eggs in the games, because it makes sense because he's called Eggman, but it's also bad that he's only shown eating eggs. I like that even a Tails like this is still not showing he's afraid in front of Eggman. With all of the time he's had to deal with him, and the fact that he wanted to be cool like Sonic, That makes more sense. Eggman calls Tails a villain, which is delusional but realistic. He says he's notified his virus search and destroy program on him. Tails tells Sonic about this, and uses the black box keys to type in the name of the output device. He presses the Go To button, but gets told that it's not operational yet. The floor gets shook around him, and he tells Sonic to get the output device working to free him. But there's no answer from Sonic. Never mind how that'd worry Tails. Because as soon as he read his words, he started running away looking for any clues that might lead him to that output device. The narration's aware that he had no idea where to go, and justifies that he was just happy he had an excuse to do something else. He has to reassure himself that Tails knows what he's doing, and that if he had jumped in there after him, Eggman would have won. It makes him sympathetic that he had enough anxiety about such a horrifying situation that he had to reassure himself out loud. That's what's tricky. Sympathetic moments aren't cool, but writers have to give him some to keep him likable. He hears a noise and sees a shaking bush. He rambles for a while before saying he's Sonic. A small white animal leaves the bush with a long snout and pink ears and eyes, and a long thin tail. He sarcastically says he's not Sonic and just looks like him, and she's dumb enough to not get the sarcasm. I hate how long this is taken. She asks for help, but doesn't tell him what she needs help with. And somehow he says she'd better introduce herself first and breaks the fourth wall again. She calls herself Iggy like the SEC Online character, and she's a mouse. She tells him something bad happened in Mystic Cave, and he correctly predicts that she's upset about people getting sucked into monitor screens into another universe. This really is boring. Sonic says all this begging stuff is just wasting time. If the writer knows this, why is he writing it? Her endless, meaningless talking has revealed that she heard the robot say something scary. Again, it takes way too long for her to give him the information he needs. She describes burrow bots, and the story wastes my time describing what they're like. She says one of them was carrying something heavy in a case and they were heading for Wing Fortress. More padding to read instead of Sonic instantly heading for that place. Right now, I hate this Iggy character. No wonder it's so many pages long. The writer makes Sonic too talkative, which is boring for any character. Sonic somehow considers offering someone a ride on his back. He runs away, and it turns out she can keep up with him through the power of Creator's Pet and gives the credit to Tails, as she's a member of his fan club. Well, it makes as much sense as Sonic being fast. So it only comes off as Creator's Pet because of how annoying she's been so far. Because she hasn't really done anything to earn the preferential treatment right now. The pacing would be so much better if he wasn't wasting his time talking to this wimp who's scared of going into a dark place when she's from a cave. And if Sonic lampshaded this, then why was it written anyways? The book's really boring at this point. She runs towards the overgrown entranceway. Sonic thinks that's a bad idea, and there's an unconvincing reason as to why, and she screams and he doesn't hear anything more. So he runs into Wing Fortress, and it's dark with strings of moss hanging from above. He hears a clanging sound, so he knows to head in that direction. It takes forever describing some burrow bots wearing baseball caps, and Sonic eventually listens for the direction of a voice calling for help, which is why he doesn't fight them. As I expected, it turns out she was put in one of the advancing burrow bots. I have to wonder why she's still able to call for help then instead of being brainwashed. I hate that it takes a giant paragraph to describe Sonic spin jumps the burrow bots really quickly. Why doesn't Sonic instantly destroy the final one then? It pads it out for paragraphs with them talking to each other. She thanks Sonic for saving her, calls him a superhero, and when he honestly says he knows, she nitpicks, "That's not very modest." Like she's not used to his cocky personality somehow. He says, "When you're as cool as I am, who needs modesty? You know I'm good, I know I'm good, everyone knows I'm good, so why should I pretend I'm not?" That's true, he's honest, and not too delusional to know she was right. I'm still calling him out on almost breaking the fourth wall. Anyone actually emotionally invested in the universe of a franchise doesn't appreciate that. Sonic's responsible enough to tell her to be careful as she reads the contents of the crates. One of them has the output device. The writing on the output device goes from useful information on how to use it to a bunch of redundant warnings for the sake of forced comedy that end up having nothing to do with this. Sonic tells her he's heard enough of that a little too late for me, but at least he tries. He's clever enough to use a burrow butt arm to pry open the biggest crate, which has another output device and an instruction manual, even though only Eggman planned on using devices. There's more padding as a result. Somehow Sonic ends up talking as if Eggman bought this kit that, if constructed, can create real people out of images on a computer. Well, it's a good thing Eggman isn't the source of all technology anymore, but I would rather Eggman make it because he's supposed to be an awesome main villain. Also, this means Sonic Boom wasn't that original when it had Tails make an invention like that. Iggy finds a small screwdriver in a packing case. Sonic would have found it anyways, but at least she tried. The two of them have to put together the output device based on a diagram that was taped to the bottom of the biggest crate's lid. But it was easy for them to do it, which is inspiring. Somehow, all of the diagram's instructions were in another language when the manual isn't. It's too bad the story doesn't have them be finished putting it together right after this. Instead, it has a whole bunch of boring, worthless words, like recapping Tails' situation. They put together something 3 times as tall as Sonic. It says that one of Eggman's computer monitors is showing a video of Eggman playing tic-tac-toe with a Motobug. So that's new. Sonic sarcastically quotes at her for stating the obvious when it doesn't turn on. They have to look at the manual again to remind themselves that it didn't come with batteries. I knew that'd be a problem, and somehow they forgot. But I love how relatable they were being by having to put together a do-it-yourself thing. Before Sonic Boom, they find out they could also use a high-voltage electricity cable to power it. Sonic says quiet and listens for a while, and eventually he tunes into the low thrumming sound from below and figures out that the Winged Fortress has a power plant below them. There's some more padding, and he points to the holes in the floor that the Burrobots made as a way to get down there. Obviously, we didn't see a power plant in the games, but it would make no sense if it didn't. How would it be able to fly if it didn't have an energy source? So this is really awesome. He gets the idea to ask a computer how to get the power out by using a Burrowbot's arm on his keyboard. Iggy says she's a computer expert and was called a hacker. So now she's actually endearing herself to me. Between this and her being a mouse named Iggy, who even has the same real first name as the SEC Online character, I'm starting to wonder if the Iggy from SEC Online was based on her. So he goes into the holes without her, and it's dark with a large glowing object ahead of him and a computer on top. Something wraps around his leg, and he panics only to realize it's an electric flex. Eventually, he finds a plug and plugs it in, and gets told to type in the password. Eggman should be using retina scans instead. Somehow he needs to ask if excruciatingly as an X or not. The password he types in is accepted. His spelling was terrible earlier. He spelled system with I instead of Y. But here he spells everything right. He picks up a coil of cable and it's boring again for a while, though he does reveal that his idea of good food is pizza to go. It's a shame that he's never shown liking any chili dogs, but it's nice to see some variety. Eventually she tells him to throw the cable up to her. Then something large and heavy hits him in the back, knocking him to the floor, and it gets sat on. So I don't think that's ever happened before. Eventually a door opens, and out of it steps Eggman. Sonic mocks him, saying that by holding a torch under his chin to look sinister, all he's doing is giving him a good look up his nostrils. Somehow, Iggy doesn't know what to do, when she was already told to use the machine to save people. It turns out there's a grounder on Sonic's back. The story just wastes my time and cuts away from Sonic's point of view as the drill tips begin eating away at Sonic's spines. So I think that's new. It finally goes back to Tails, but with the worst of timing. The silver path Tails is standing on starts moving and twisting. A section in the distance breaks in two, and the end of the party was on starts to act like it's being eaten away. Eventually, that happens to him again. This is very uneventful. He sees a giant tube collection stood on end, floating, and it talks way too much as it's threatening him. At times like this, it would be better if it didn't talk, like the bandits in the games. It's confusing that it keeps using capitalist as an insult. The robot says the silicone mines are full of decadent capitalist spreadsheets and account programs, like that's possible. They're just glitchy AIs that somehow have free will by mistake. I hate that it's explained that Tails had barely been understanding what he's saying to him. A big hatch below the robot slides open and a big L block tumbles out and shakes the ground. A T block falls too and he has to dodge it. Some time is wasted as the story repeats itself. He says they can only get out of here by building a bridge, and this rain of bricks looks like a place to start. So he wants to get that robot to drop them on each other so he could get off this metal island. Can it just fly? Earlier in the scene, it was explained that a giant robot like this can only fly because it was programmed to be able to do so. So the laws of gravity don't have to apply to it. In Tails' adventure, there are some places where he couldn't fly because of the wind. So I just have to assume that there's wind that keeps him from flying some places. He also taunts the robot as he's carrying out his plan. The story repeats itself until he has a bridge made. Finally. When a block hits a section he's standing on, it shakes, and he slips off the edge and has to grab it. He eventually flings himself up onto another block just before it be too late, and jumps to safety. There's more padding, and he sees a large black ball that for some reason didn't instantly start rolling towards him. The story tries to have some humor by saying that Tails' reflection looks weird on it like he's a balloon fox, and says he had no time to laugh at how stupid it looked. He runs for a needlessly long time until he starts using the black box again, constantly pressing the wrong button because he's distracted and running. He ends up spelling out memory cache and presses the go to button again. It's like a big invisible chair had appeared under him. It flies him along the shining pathway at high speed. Earlier, he wasn't allowed to go anywhere using the black box. He was told he wasn't allowed to go to the exact location he's heading for now. Why is the box working? But at least this is something that never happened before. He gets sent towards an insect-shaped building. So I think that's new. I don't know why he's scared of a big silicone chip and doesn't want to go in the building. The invisible chair reaches the base of the building's big leg and shoots upwards towards a dark block and reaches the top of the leg and turns to head for the side of the building. A tiny hole appears in it just ahead of him and expands very quickly to make a fox-sized opening in it. And it gets sent flying through the hole and rolls into a ball as he lands in a tight tunnel shaped like a roller coaster. It doesn't need to describe it that much. It's a good attention to detail that it calls his nose wet and cold as he gets pressed against the wall. He rolls over and opens his eyes in a dark room and hears the voice of Joe Sushi and recognizes a lot of other people. Joe tells him that the people in here have jumped to the conclusion that almost everyone in the world is here. Idiots. He tries to use the black box's delete button, and the box's screen says that a rogue program must be using the box because the witch was reported deactivated by the big robot he ran from earlier. And how did the big robot know that? He didn't see the witch die. I guess he tried to call the witch, because it's an AI. So the box is programmed to self-destruct instead of just be made entirely non-functional, even though a self-destruct could be used by him as a way to get himself out of a prison he's trapped in. Tails kicks it over to a wall and it disintegrates in a smoke cloud, and the crowd applauds and looks at him in hero worship mode for some reason. He feels the floor tremble, and there's more padding until he tells everyone to move away. And eventually the whole wall gets destroyed, and rubble pours into the room, followed by the big black ball. That conveniently stops for no reason. Tails gets to look like a hero again by telling it to leave the others alone when it's him it wants. He jumps with a plan to bounce off and run down the tunnel it had dug. He makes it explode with a burst of black powder. He says it must have busted itself up by beating its way here. He's given some hero worship and finds another black box bigger than the last one. This is so interesting. He types in the words output device, prefaced by a big acronym I never felt like mentioning, and presses go to. Even though only Tails used the box, everyone's lifted and zipped down the tunnel by an unseen force onto a wide path. I guess it read his mind. The sky changes to a green color, and the wide path ahead of them briefly narrows, only to become a huge motorway. Tails, of course, caring enough to check behind him often, and never notices anyone fall off. They see a big eyeball that's multi-sided and constantly changing color. There's a bunch of time wasted on me, even after they end up standing in front of it. Joe tells them to look at the far side of the robot eyeball, where the floor behind it is broken, and a huge power cable connected to it has been sliced in two, and there's big sparks of electricity arcing between the two halves, and giving off a nasty smell. Relatably, Tails doesn't want to risk getting shocked. Eventually, he says he knows someone who can get fried, and runs over to a large empty space. He shouts for a while, and finally says he's Tails, and eventually sees some tiny black dots in the distance heading towards him, and something big and yellow starts heading for them down the shining silver path. He tells everyone to get in front of the eyeball. Rolling towards him is a big yellow ball that splits, which turns the ball into a huge mobile mouth. Two black eyes open above the mouth, and it smirks as it heads for Tails. He runs into a dive-bombing wing of 5 giant buzz bombers and turns right so they miss the missiles they're aiming for him. Well, it's competent of them to have missiles. There's more padding, and then he turns some more towards the electricity. He jumps over it, and the yellow blob gets shocked, completing the electrical circuit through its own body. There's so many new things happening in this book. A bolt of white light shoots from the top of the output device, soaring high into the sky. He gets surrounded because the buzz bombers weren't actually stupid enough to not think to fly higher in the air to avoid crashing into the yellow thing, which always reminded me of Pac-Man. The big eyeball turns, and its iris turns black, and it makes a sucking sound. And Tails, who's been dodging bombs, sees his friends getting sucked into the eyeball, while somehow astonished at this happening. The white beam pulses with colors, and 2 buzz bombers get whisked away as well. The other 3 look distracted, I guess out of fear of the suction thing. So Tails types the words buzz bomber and hits the delete button. I sure hope we're supposed to believe that deletes the ones that were sucked in too. The last of the buzz bombs drift slowly to the ground and blow a small crater in the metal. The handset gets sucked towards the eyeball, and somehow he says oh no when it gets the same fate, when he should know that this is the way out of here. Something inside the eyeball grabs him and points him head first upwards, and then he finds himself bathed in white light, and he shoots up out of the top of the eyeball and up the beam towards a rectangular hole. It goes back to Sonic, and unnecessarily as a condescending line where it tells us to try to keep up. There's a bunch of noise, and Iggy screams. Sonic is told he'll be more full of holes than something, and Eggman trails off, so Sonic gets to say, "One of your plans? Your head?" Eventually, something blocks out the light that was coming down the hole from the floor above, and he sees the silhouette of Porker, who raises a trotter to his lips to silence him and points down at the top of Eggman's head, which is below him. Porker jumps into the hole onto Eggman, and he puts his hands over his eyes and ears. Eggman somehow says it's aliens from above for the sake of forced comedy. One of his feet catches in a loop in the power cable that led from the control desk to the upper floor, and he's sent flying. Porker somehow wastes time instead of immediately smacking the badnik on the side of the head ineffectively. His hands bruise from it, and Porker gets told to try a spin attack. The back of his head bounces off the robot's back and he falls dazed. Because realistically, not everyone can do what Sonic does just because they try. They hear someone say this is a job for a hero, and a small orange ball lands on top of Grounder, making it explode, making Tails look all the more awesome because he needed to do this. Of course, I don't get to see an animal get freed, just like with most of the Burrobots. There's nothing inherently bad about batteries powering a robot. Tails annoyingly taunts Sonic that he's lying down on the job and getting too old for this, and should let him take over. Finally, he gets concerned, wondering what happened to his back, even though he could see the grounder on it. Sonic stands up stiffly and brushes off pieces of smashed robot and drill. Tails says there's 4 little holes and tries unsuccessfully to make him feel better by saying he could hang something out of them. Sonic doesn't like the idea and says he'll grow back his hair in a few weeks and hopes he'll be lighter and aerodynamic. Eggman's revealed to have gone away, and Sonic's thankfully written to say there must have been a trap door or concealed entrance here. Porker compliments Tails, who says it was nothing much while blushing and that any old superhero could have done it. And realistically, he gets hungry and they decide to get stuff to eat. It explains that they eat hamburgers and chocolate bars and sodas, and it somehow expects me to believe Sonic and Tails ate a ridiculous amount of all of that. They lie on the grass outside Wing Fortress as their friends play and frolic. It's annoying that Sonic accuses Tails of lying about what he'd been through and says he's been playing too many video games. There's more padding, and Sonic wonders if he discovered any of Eggman's plans in there as Tails eats a Robotnik chocolate bar, which was named after him because it's fat and nutty. Iggy offers to try to find out what Eggman's been up to with that computer, and Sonic calls it a good idea. I like her at this point. They hear shouting and scuffling and see Flicky lashing out with his wings, talking like he had gone crazy and thought he was Mario. Then Johnny joins in and starts talking like that as well until he collapses, clutching his stomach. He starts losing definition with his outline becoming fuzzy and his gray coat changes to a single color. It should have told me that he had a gray coat from the start. I was just picturing him as looking like Johnny Lightfoot the whole time. A second voice disagrees with him, and eventually Iggy wonders if some of them were infected by a computer virus. I hate that it breaks the fourth wall again. If the writer didn't take this job seriously because it was Sonic, he should have turned it down. Eventually, Iggy thinks they should go back in cyberspace before they run out of power and disappear. Tails talks like he's been infected too, and trips on a tree root and starts shapeshifting. So eventually, the heroes end up in Wing Fortress's computer room with the other people in a locked room. It's too bad we didn't get to see the point where Sonic was competent enough to get them in the locked room. Iggy calls up the program that'll set up the computer to capture anyone who touches it, and somehow she doesn't think to get away from the computer right afterwards. So she gets sucked in and lampshades that she should have known that happened. Well, it is force of habit, because she's a computer hacker. She also talks as if she's not guaranteed to get infected, and can find a way of curing the virus. She says there's bound to be a programming language in the computer that she could find and use. Sonic doesn't like having to stay in front of it for when they're ready to leave. He unlocks the door and tells the people who were locked up that he's going to lead them to the next level. And the story gets boring by having silly dialogue and wasting my time. Sonic tells everyone to put a hand on the person in front of them, and he says when he gives the signal, the lead person has to press the enter button. So a flash of light covers them and they instantly vanish. Sonic looks sympathetic, hoping they'll be safe. And it starts some more padding. Tails tells Sonic everyone's back to normal now, along with a lot of pointless dialogue, and there's more padding. Minutes later, Sonic returns to the computer with a torch and coil of rope. And there's more padding after it explains that Sonic already searched the upper decks, so he knows it's the lower decks he should explore. Why'd he even consider disconnecting the power cable? Good thing he didn't. He plans on leaving for a half hour to explore. It shouldn't take him a half hour when he's Sonic. He slides down the power cable onto the grounder remains below and flicks on his torch. And he sees 3 doors and wonders how Eggman was supposed to get to the room above from here. He plays Eeny Meeny Miny Moe to pick a door and opens a broom closet covered in grounders that were inexplicably guarding it. He destroys one of them and starts heading for the other one. He throws out his arms and legs to land on top of its head, and its arms can't reach him. He holds a torch against the side of its head and says that's an unprogrammer for friendliness. And he threatens to use it to make him a good guy if he doesn't do what he says. That's brilliant. The robot was programmed with the ability to speak English, and yet he still doesn't know that's just a torch. To be fair, he also lives on a magical planet with chaos emeralds where Sonic can run super fast. It's not crazy that he would believe that Sonic found a magical torch that could reprogram him at that point. So the robot asks him what he wants him to do. This is new. and Sonic insults his coarse, rough voice and then tells him to take him to Eggman. And at first he doesn't understand him because he kept using a bunch of slang. Sonic's acting no better than Eggman to him. He doesn't need to point out that he's stupid to his face, let alone make fun of his voice. The Badnik gets reminded not to try any funny business or he'll get made the nicest robot ever. And he rolls towards the second door that automatically opens for him. Then there's some more padding, and it goes to Tails' point of view. He's running down a silver path followed by the others. It explains that his black box had gotten lost in the confusion of them getting out of cyberspace. So why didn't the buzz bombers that were sucked up cause any trouble? I guess he smacked into the wall and exploded. It's also explained why Tails doesn't go far ahead of the others. Heroes have responsibilities, so he has to protect them. The story goes back to boring, needlessly descriptive narration for a while. He heads for stacks of bricks and columns and a bunch of other man-made stuff. Whatever. Iggy shouts to get some attention, and Tails walks over to pick up a slim wheel that Iggy calls a go-to. Then there's padding again. She tells the skeptical Tails that he could try having fun building stuff by fitting bits together until he gets something that works. And the idea is, it works if he wants it to work, by reading his mind. She says everything he's seen here was programmed out of these building blocks, so he can make whatever he wants. It goes back to more padding. It's a nice touch that the Grounder's eyes glow with just enough light to show Sonic 3 meters ahead in the dark. Because it makes sense that they would see in the dark. The narration justifies that the Badniks would happily destroy themselves to get rid of Sonic, which justifies why Sonic had to threaten the robot into not turning towards a door to the reactor chamber. He gets brought into a cubicle elevator and there's more worthless padding. The Badnik's too dumb to know what he means by "are we there?" Sonic starts asking questions and eventually finds out that while the lift can go down to Eggman's level, only Badniks with the correct access code can do that. And Badniks like that are on this level, the Badnik Construction Factory. He hears someone shout "charge" behind him, and light floods the hallway, revealing a ton of Badniks. So it wastes time describing all of them to explain which ones are there, for a bunch of huge paragraphs. I seriously don't care. They all die in one hit just as easily. It's written that Sonic's trying to put on a brave face, when really you shouldn't be scared of Badniks. He wastes time taunting a few times, and then there's 5 paragraphs, most of which are huge, describing Sonic fighting these Badniks with no creativity and tension involved. It sure was phoned in for padding. He runs through a door and goes upstairs in a room with stairs in both directions. The rollers hit the door and the rest of it explodes inwards. They head for the stairs leading down and end up falling down them. There's more padding and he sees the stairs form a square around a shaft where there's a pipe. It didn't need to describe the pipe. He jumps into the open space grabbing the pipe and his legs wrap around it. Realistically, he feels his gloves getting hot. He keeps holding the pipe for a surprising amount of time. He eventually hauls himself over the banister and runs for the doorway. This is exciting. He calls Eggman evil bully, and Eggman turns slowly with a smile, and his desk has a computer and output device.